I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The Windsor dinner was supposed to be private, polished, and predictable. Instead, one sentence changed the atmosphere completely. Catherine stopped speaking. William noticed her expression before anyone else did. Then the Princess of Wales lowered her eyes as tears began to form. But before the room could recover, Princess Anne pushed back her chair, turned directly toward Camilla, and did something no one at that table expected. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had expected the evening to settle the family, not divide it. Only a handful of trusted household staff were nearby as King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, Catherine, and Anne sat down together at Windsor. The Princess Royal is the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, a role Anne has carried with a reputation for discipline and duty. That mattered because she rarely stepped into emotional disputes unless she believed someone had crossed a serious line. Camilla crossed that line when she turned toward Catherine and criticized her decision to step back from an engagement so she could remain with Princess Charlotte. The Queen Consort said family concerns could not keep interfering with royal responsibility. Catherine tried to answer calmly, but the accusations struck at something personal. She had spent years proving that motherhood and service could exist together. Her voice weakened, her eyes filled, and the woman expected one day to stand beside William as Queen found herself fighting tears at the dinner table. William stopped eating the moment he saw her face change. The prince knew this was not a harmless comment about scheduling. He turned toward his wife, then toward Camilla, but Anne moved first. She pushed her chair back and told the Queen Consort that Catherine would not be humiliated for choosing her children. Camilla answered that she was speaking about duty, not motherhood. Yet Anne refused to let the distinction soften what had happened. Charles said nothing for several seconds. The king looked from his wife to his daughter-in-law, then toward his sister, knowing that any response would carry weight far beyond dinner. Catherine placed her napkin beside the plate and rose. Anne stood with her. That gesture made the intervention impossible to dismiss as a sudden burst of anger. William watched them leave and noticed something more troubling. Anne had reacted with anger, but not surprise. She seemed prepared, as if she had heard this kind of criticism before. And as Catherine disappeared from the dining room with Anne beside her, William began wondering exactly how long his aunt had been waiting for this moment. What made the confrontation so explosive was not simply what Camilla said. It was who heard it, who was wounded by it, and who finally refused to remain silent. Catherine had spent years learning how to absorb royal pressure without showing the strain. Anne had spent a lifetime respecting duty above comfort. And Camilla understood better than almost anyone how brutally the monarchy could judge a woman. Catherine carried more than a title into that Windsor dining room. As Princess of Wales, she stood in the position traditionally held by the wife of the heir to the throne, meaning every choice she made was measured against the future of the monarchy. Yet behind that responsibility were George, Charlotte, and Louis. She had made one principle clear within her household. Royal duty would shape their lives, but it would not be allowed to consume their childhood. That balance mattered deeply to her, which was why Camilla's criticism landed with such force. Anne understood that pressure better than most. The Princess Royal had built her entire public identity around discipline, endurance, and an almost relentless commitment to duty. She rarely turned private frustration into open confrontation, and that was precisely why her reaction at dinner carried such weight. When she challenged Camilla, she was not behaving impulsively. She was signaling that something had crossed a boundary she could no longer ignore. Camilla, however, carried her own resentment into the dispute. She believed she had spent years absorbing judgment, hostility, and public suspicion without the kind of immediate emotional protection Catherine now seemed to receive. The Queen Consort saw herself as someone who had survived pressure by enduring it. Watching Catherine receive sympathy for stepping back from an engagement stirred something uncomfortable in her. To Camilla, the issue was not only one cancelled appearance. It was whether different women inside the same institution were being held to different standards. William began to sense that difference the moment his wife broke down. The prince knew Catherine did not cry easily in front of others, especially during family gatherings where emotional control mattered. Her reaction told him the remark had touched something older. As he replayed the evening, he remembered smaller comments about scheduling, parenting, and future responsibilities that had once seemed harmless. Now they felt connected. Anne had noticed them too. She had heard the sharper tone when Catherine's family priorities came up, and she had watched the Queen Consort's frustration grow whenever those choices were defended. She had said little at first, but she had not forgotten. That was why her intervention came so quickly. To understand why Anne stood up so fast, the story had to return to the moment when she first realized Catherine was no longer facing ordinary criticism. The Windsor dinner did not begin the conflict. The real fracture came days earlier, during a smaller royal gathering where almost no one understood the significance of what they were hearing. Catherine believed she was explaining a simple scheduling decision. Camilla heard something very different. Anne happened to be close enough to hear the exchange, and one sentence convinced her that another confrontation was coming. Catherine had joined the meeting, expecting routine discussion about the autumn calendar. Senior members of the family were reviewing public engagements, private commitments, and the practical demands that would shape the months ahead. A royal engagement simply means an official appearance carried out on behalf of the monarchy, and these dates are often arranged long before the public hears about them. Catherine asked for one adjustment so she could remain available for Charlotte during an important family matter. She believed the change had already been accepted. Camilla waited until the wider conversation had ended before challenging her. The Queen Consort told Catherine that future queens cannot keep rearranging the crown around the nursery. The words were controlled, but the meaning was sharp. Catherine answered immediately that she would never apologize for protecting her children. She did not raise her voice. She did not retreat either. For her, George, Charlotte, and Louis were not obstacles to duty. They were part of the responsibility she believed she was preparing to carry. Anne heard enough to know the exchange was not ordinary. She watched Catherine's expression harden, then soften, as she tried to close the conversation without creating a larger dispute. Later, the Princess Royal approached her niece privately and asked whether similar remarks had been made before. Catherine brushed the concern aside, saying she did not want a family disagreement turned into something bigger. Anne accepted the answer in the moment, but she did not believe the matter was finished. The wording troubled her most. Camilla had not simply questioned one date on a calendar. She had questioned Catherine's judgment as a future queen. That difference stayed with Anne, because criticism of a schedule could be resolved. Criticism of someone's fitness for the future crown could grow into something far more damaging. Anne acted before the dinner. According to a documented private account of the family discussion, she warned Charles that repeated criticism of Catherine's parenting could become a pressure campaign if no boundary was set. The king listened carefully, but he chose not to intervene immediately. He believed the tension might settle on its own. That silence changed everything. When Camilla raised the same issue at dinner and Catherine finally broke under the weight of it, Anne knew the family had already been given one chance to stop this. So when the Queen Consort questioned Catherine's parenting again, the Princess Royal was no longer hearing an unfortunate remark. She was hearing a warning ignored. Anne did not shout. That made the moment even more powerful. While Catherine fought back tears and William sat rigid beside her, the Princess Royal turned toward Camilla with the cold control of someone who had already made up her mind. The room waited for Charles to intervene. He did not. Anne then delivered a response that transformed an uncomfortable family dinner into a direct confrontation over dignity, motherhood, and royal authority. Camilla had just questioned whether Catherine's family priorities were compatible with the responsibilities waiting ahead. The Queen Consort treated the issue as one of duty, but everyone at the table understood what had really been touched. Catherine was not simply managing a diary. As Princess of Wales, the title carried by the wife of the heir to the throne, she was preparing for a future role while raising 3 children under intense public pressure. That was why the criticism felt personal rather than practical. William reached toward his wife as her composure began to break. The prince knew Catherine hated becoming the center of family conflict, and he could see her trying to stop the moment from growing larger. Charles watched without speaking. The king had already heard Anne's private warning before the dinner, so his silence now carried a different weight. He was not witnessing a problem for the first time. He was watching one return. Anne pushed her chair back. She looked directly at Camilla and told her that Catherine's children were not weaknesses to be used against her. The Queen Consort answered that she had been discussing duty, not motherhood. Anne refused the distinction. Duty, she said, did not require humiliation, and responsibility did not give anyone permission to turn a mother's concern for her children into evidence against her. Catherine finally tried to stop them. She said quietly that she did not want an argument fought over her, but her voice broke before she could finish. William heard it, and something in him changed. He turned toward Camilla and asked whether the remark had anything to do with the earlier Windsor scheduling exchange. Camilla froze for a moment. The question told her the private conversation was no longer private. Either Anne had spoken to William, Charles had shared the warning, or both men now understood there was a pattern behind the dinner confrontation. What had started as one sharp remark had become something much more dangerous, an open acknowledgement that old resentment had been building beneath the surface. Charles finally lifted his hand. The movement ended the argument, but it did not erase what had been said. The king looked across the table, knowing that whatever he chose next would either reduce Anne's intervention to another family clash or turn it into a lasting boundary. The table fell silent when Charles finally spoke, because everyone understood that neutrality was no longer possible. For Charles, the most painful part of the evening was not deciding who had spoken too sharply. It was recognizing that 2 loyalties had collided directly in front of him. Camilla was his wife. Catherine was the woman expected one day to stand beside William as queen. Anne was demanding that he protect a boundary. And William's silence made one thing unmistakable. The king's response would be remembered long after dinner ended. Charles understood that his role gave him more than the power to end an argument. As sovereign, the monarch is the person who formally stands at the head of the royal institution. But inside that dining room, he was also a husband, father, brother, and father-in-law. Those roles were now pulling against one another. If relations between Camilla and the Wales household collapsed, the damage would not stay private. William and Catherine represented the monarchy's future, while the Queen Consort stood beside the current king. A permanent fracture between them could divide the family at its most sensitive point. William stayed behind after Catherine left. The prince chose his words carefully, but there was no softness in the message. He told his father that criticism of his wife's parenting could not become acceptable simply because it was presented as concern about duty. Catherine had spent years protecting her children while carrying enormous public responsibility, and he would not allow that commitment to be turned into a weakness. Charles listened without interrupting. He could hear that this was not a son complaining about one unpleasant dinner. It was the future king drawing his own boundary. Charles remained at the table after William left. He removed his glasses, set them down, and sat in silence for several minutes before Anne returned. The king finally admitted that he should have stopped the issue earlier. According to a documented private account of their exchange, the Princess Royal reminded him that she had already warned him after the previous Windsor conversation. Anne did not accuse him loudly. She did something harder. She forced her brother to face the fact that avoiding conflict had allowed the conflict to grow. Charles made his decision that night. Catherine's parenting choices, private family needs, and disagreements over her schedule would no longer be raised during formal or semi-formal royal gatherings. Those gatherings are structured family occasions where personal disputes are expected to remain outside the room. The king also told Camilla that the matter between her and Catherine would be addressed separately. Camilla did not welcome the boundary. The queen consort heard protection for Catherine, where Charles believed he was restoring order. Her reaction made clear that the emotional damage had not ended with the dinner. By the time the evening was over, Charles had finally drawn a line, but the person standing on the other side of it was his own wife. The confrontation ended quickly. The damage did not. Catherine left the dining room shaken. William followed minutes later. Anne refused to soften what she had said. And Camilla, suddenly left with the consequences of a remark she had expected to pass as ordinary criticism, discovered that the emotional balance inside the family had shifted. Windsor became quiet again, but behind several closed doors, very different conversations were beginning. Catherine did not leave the castle immediately. She moved into a private sitting room and tried to steady herself before facing anyone else. That mattered, because Windsor was not simply another royal residence that night. It had become the place where a family disagreement had crossed into something deeply personal. William joined her soon afterward and told her she would not be expected to return to the table. The prince made the decision quietly, but its meaning was clear. Their absence would now speak for them. Camilla faced a very different silence. After Charles asked for privacy, the queen consort sat alone and replayed Anne's words again and again. No one had stepped forward to defend her interpretation of the remark. No one had treated the confrontation as harmless. She felt angry, but beneath the anger was isolation. Camilla believed she had endured years of pressure by accepting that royal life could be unforgiving. Watching Catherine receive protection for something she had once been expected to survive alone made that frustration even sharper. Charles understood that the family could not simply wake up and pretend the night had never happened. The king canceled the planned family breakfast the next morning and instructed his household to give Catherine space. A royal household is the team of private staff who manage the daily working and personal arrangements around senior members of the family. Canceling the breakfast was therefore more than convenience. It was a quiet signal that the monarch considered the damage serious enough to interrupt the family schedule. Anne refused to help soften the story inside Windsor. When an aide suggested describing the evening as a misunderstanding, the Princess Royal rejected the wording. According to a documented private account of that exchange, she said Catherine had been visibly hurt and that reducing the incident to confusion would only make the wound deeper. Anne had intervened because she believed a boundary had been crossed, and she would not now pretend otherwise. Catherine spent the next hours thinking less about Camilla's remark and more about Anne's reaction. The speed of that defense still unsettled her. Why had her aunt understood the danger before anyone else did? Then Catherine made a decision. She asked to see Anne alone, without William, Charles, aides, or household staff. Their private conversation would reveal why Anne had truly intervened, and why Catherine's tears had frightened her more than Camilla's words angered her. When Catherine asked to speak with Anne alone, she was not looking for another defender. She wanted to understand why the Princess Royal had broken years of disciplined restraint over one dinner table remark. No aides entered the room. William stayed away. For the first time since the confrontation, neither woman had to perform a royal role. What Anne told Catherine turned the humiliation of the previous evening into something far more personal. Catherine spoke first. She admitted she had tried to ignore Camilla's comments because she feared any response would become another story about division between senior royal women. A senior royal is simply a member of the family who carries major public duties on behalf of the monarchy, which means even private disagreements can quickly become larger than the people involved. Catherine had wanted to protect the institution, protect William, and protect her children from another wave of attention. Silence had seemed easier. Anne listened without interrupting. Then Catherine asked the question that had been troubling her since dinner. Why had she intervened so quickly? The Princess Royal paused before answering. According to a documented private account of their conversation, she said watching someone remain silent while being wounded could become another form of permission. Anne had seen Catherine trying to absorb the insult, and she believed that if everyone else stayed quiet, the message would be unmistakable. Catherine lowered her guard. She admitted that the criticism had hurt because it targeted the one choice she refused to regret. George, Charlotte, and Louis were not distractions from duty. They were her children. Anne answered firmly that protecting them did not weaken her commitment to the monarchy. The future queen did not have to prove strength by becoming emotionally absent. She could serve the crown and still refuse to let royal expectations erase the family she was raising. Anne then shared something deeper. She explained that part of her reaction came from regret. In earlier family conflicts, she had sometimes chosen restraint when speaking sooner might have prevented lasting damage. She had watched silence become distance, then resentment, then fracture. This time, she refused to repeat that pattern. Catherine absorbed those words carefully. By the end of the conversation, something had changed. She decided she would attend her next scheduled engagement, instead of withdrawing. She would not retaliate against Camilla, and she would not turn the dispute into a public battle. But she would also stop pretending that what happened at Windsor was acceptable. Anne stood with her when the conversation ended. Catherine was still hurt, but she was no longer defeated. She had found her footing again. But outside Windsor's private rooms, the confrontation was already becoming impossible to contain. Royal families can close doors, cancel breakfasts, and silence corridors. They cannot always contain a moment once enough people know something went wrong. By the following day, the Windsor dinner was no longer being discussed, only inside the family. Catherine's abrupt departure, Anne's intervention, and Camilla's role became the center of public fascination. Then one newspaper front page reduced the entire confrontation to 5 words that changed how the story was understood. Palace staff moved quickly to keep the evening classified as a private family matter. No detailed account was released, and no official explanation was offered for who had said what. That mattered because once a royal disagreement becomes public, every silence can be treated like confirmation, and every appearance can be examined for hidden meaning. The palace hoped restraint would cool the story. Instead, the lack of detail made Catherine's next engagement even more important. Catherine arrived composed, but the seriousness in her manner was impossible to miss. William stayed close, without turning the appearance into a show of protection. The prince understood the balance they needed to strike. If they withdrew, the public could read it as defeat. If they behaved as though nothing had happened, the pain of the previous night would seem erased. So they continued their duties together, sending a quieter message. Catherine had been hurt, but she had not been pushed out of step. Camilla faced a different kind of pressure at her own engagement. The queen consort knew every pause, smile, and exchange would now be interpreted through the Windsor argument. She kept moving, but the attention had changed. The story was no longer about a private disagreement over scheduling. It had become a larger argument about whether royal duty could be used to judge a mother for protecting her children. Then the front page landed. A national newspaper carried the headline, "Anne draws the line at Windsor," alongside separate photographs of Anne and Catherine. Broadcasters repeated the framing throughout the day, describing the dispute as a clash over where service to the crown ended and family protection began. That single phrase shifted the focus away from gossip and toward the deeper question of why Anne had felt compelled to intervene at all. Outside Windsor Castle, visitors began discussing the Princess Royal as the person who had changed the course of the evening. Catherine drew strong sympathy, while Camilla faced growing criticism for turning a family choice into a test of royal commitment. Anne's decision was increasingly seen as the defining moment. Charles understood what public attention had now made unavoidable. A private apology might ease the hurt, but only a direct family reckoning could close the fracture. And behind Windsor's walls, the king arranged exactly that. One final conversation, in which nobody would be allowed to leave the real issue unspoken. The final conversation was quieter than the dinner that caused it, but far more important. There were no raised voices and no dramatic exits. Charles brought Camilla, Catherine, William, and Anne together, because the family could not move forward by pretending nothing had happened. Catherine no longer looked defeated. Anne no longer needed to intervene. And Camilla entered knowing that this time, the conversation would not end until responsibility had been faced directly. Charles opened the meeting by making one thing clear. This was not about punishment, headlines, or protecting appearances. The king wanted to stop a private wound from becoming a permanent fracture. That mattered because William and Catherine represented the monarchy's future, while Camilla stood beside the current sovereign. If mistrust hardened between them, the consequences would reach far beyond one painful dinner. William stayed close to Catherine but did not speak for her. The prince understood that the argument had never truly been about rank or who held more influence. It was about respect. He allowed his wife to answer in her own words, while Anne watched quietly, no longer needing to shield her from the room. Camilla finally faced Catherine directly. The queen consort acknowledged that bringing her parenting choices into the dinner conversation had been unfair and personally hurtful. According to a documented private account of the meeting, she apologized without trying to defend the original remark. Catherine accepted it, but she did not erase the boundary. She said George, Charlotte, and Louis would remain central to how she managed royal life, and she would not treat motherhood and duty as enemies. Anne then explained why she had intervened. The Princess Royal said she had not been trying to humiliate Camilla or create rival sides inside the family. She acted because silence would have sent a dangerous message that Catherine deserved what was happening. For Anne, that was the line she refused to cross. Charles made the final decision. Disagreements about schedules, duties, and household responsibilities could still be discussed privately, but personal attacks involving spouses or children would not be tolerated at family gatherings. The king had finally turned an emotional lesson into a lasting boundary. The confrontation changed everyone. Catherine left Windsor with her dignity restored. Camilla accepted that influence did not excuse cruelty. William saw his wife defended without needing to start a larger war. Charles learned that avoiding conflict can sometimes create more of it, and Anne's intervention became the defining act of the evening. The Windsor dinner began with Catherine in tears, but it ended by establishing something stronger than silence. Inside this family, duty could demand sacrifice, but it would no longer be used as permission to wound. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.